In northwest Alabama, there's a tiny little town called West Tuscumbia. It's about 100 miles up Highway 71 from Birmingham. There isn't much in West Tuscumbia to differentiate it from nearby towns like Sheffield and Russellville, or from dozens of other small towns that dot the state, except this. Only West Tuscumbia boasts a house visited by tourists from around the world, a shrine that's on the National Register of Historic Places. It was in this very house at 300 North Common Street that one of the most iconic figures in American history was born. The date was June 27th, 1880. The baby's name was Helen, and she was born to Arthur and Kate Adams Keller. By all accounts, Helen Keller was a normal, healthy infant. At 6 months, she started speaking. She walked at 1 year. And then, when she was 19 months old, horror struck the Keller household. To this day, doctors aren't exactly sure what the disease was. Some say it was scarlet fever. Others label it meningitis. At the time, doctors called it brain fever. Whatever it was, it left a bright, precocious child unable to speak, unable to hear, unable to see. It turned what had been a sweet little girl into an uncontrollable wild animal. By the age of 7, Helen's behavior had become abominable. Unable to know what was happening around her, unable to communicate her wants, Helen often threw tantrums. She had fits, breaking lights and dishes. She locked her mother in a closet, refusing to let her out. She overturned her baby sister's cradle. Helen's father wanted to institutionalize her. Helen's mother refused. Instead, she sought help from Alexander Graham Bell. Yes, the same Alexander Graham Bell who invented the telephone. Bell, who at the time had been working on a hearing device for deaf children, referred the desperate Kellers to the Perkins Institute for the Blind in Boston. There, they were introduced to Anne Sullivan, a recent Institute graduate who would come to play an enormous role in Helen's life. Anne was just 20 when she came to the Keller household in Alabama, hired to teach Helen. Though she'd been a star student at Perkins, Anne had no experience that would prepare her for Helen's behavior. The little girl who Anne was supposed to educate threw cutlery, grabbed food off dinner plates, sent chairs tumbling, shrieked and struggled. Helen's first act on meeting Anne was to knock out one of her front teeth. If you've ever sat and cried through a showing of The Miracle Worker, the 1962 film that won Oscars for both Anne Bancroft playing Anne and newcomer Patty Duke as Helen, you know that getting through to Helen Keller was literally a battle for Anne Sullivan. But Anne wasn't about to give up and go home. As frustrated as she was determined to teach sign language to Helen. But each day, it became more clear that Helen didn't place any meaning to the words Anne was signing. The breakthrough came one day outside at the water pump. Anne helped Helen sign water with one hand while pumping water over her other hand. Helen made the connection, then pounded the ground until Anne helped her sign W-A-T-E-R. Within 6 months, Helen had learned 575 words, some multiplication tables too. Then came reading Braille. Soon, Helen was able to write with a special typewriter. Eventually, she learned to speak by feeling Anne's throat as she spoke, imitating the vibrations. But Helen was never truly satisfied with her speech, often hard to understand. She would struggle to vocalize her words throughout much of her life. 1 year after she first spilled water into her hand, Helen Keller was celebrated in newspapers all over America and Europe. She was taken to the White House to meet President Grover Cleveland. When she was 14, Helen met and became good friends with one of the most famous men in America at the time. His name was Samuel Clemens, but everyone called him Mark Twain. To the legendary author and humorist, Helen was the eighth wonder of the world. She belonged right up there, he said, with Caesar, Alexander, Napoleon, Homer, Shakespeare, and the rest of the immortals. It was Twain who lobbied a friend to underwrite Helen's education. With the help of this financial benefactor, Helen Keller became the first deaf-blind person to graduate from college, from Radcliffe no less, graduating cum laude in 1904 with a bachelor's degree. By then, she had written and published her first autobiography. The story of my life quickly became must-reading in schools across the country. By the time she died in 1968, deaf and blind for 86 years, Helen Keller had become famous as one of the most accomplished people in the world. She was an author with no less than 14 published books. She was a staunch advocate for the disabled, a political activist, co-founding the American Civil Liberties Union. She was a tireless campaigner for women's suffrage, birth control, labor rights, and world peace. In 1953, when she was 73, Helen Keller was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. In 1964, President Johnson awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom, calling Helen an example of courage to all mankind. The following year, Helen was elected to the Women's Hall of Fame. In 1999, 31 years after her death, Helen Keller would appear on Time magazine's list of the 100 most iconic figures of the 20th century, alongside such iconic figures as Albert Einstein, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and Mahatma Gandhi. On June 1st, 1968, Helen died peacefully in her sleep, just weeks shy of her 88th birthday. Today, the simple white clapboard house in West Tuscumbia, where America's First Lady of Courage was born, is open to visitors. If you come on a weekend from early June through mid-July, you can experience on the lawn, by the water pump, a never-to-be-forgotten live performance of the Miracle Worker. For SCA-TV, I'm Phil Schlager.